Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a seriously incredible, completely true story. We're looking at the life of a guy who went from sleeping on a public bathroom floor with his toddler to becoming a Wall Street multimillionaire. It's a story that absolutely defies the odds, and we're going to walk through exactly how he did it step by step.
Have you ever looked around at your life and just thought, is this it? Is this all I'm ever going to be? Maybe you're working a job right now that barely pays the bills. Maybe you've tried to start over, but every single time you tried, doors just seem to slam right in your face. Or, maybe you're lying awake at night wondering how you're going to feed your family tomorrow. If you have ever felt that way, you absolutely need to hear about Chris Gardner. Because Chris is the ultimate proof that no matter how dark it gets, your situation is never, ever hopeless.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, a struggle and a promise. So Chris Gardner's story definitely doesn't begin in a place of privilege. He grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a really chaotic home. He never actually knew his biological father, and he grew up with a pretty violent, unpredictable stepfather. His mom was a strong woman who dreamed of a better life, but she was just constantly caught between trying to survive and enduring the daily suffering of their environment. So Chris was grinding right from the start. After escaping that childhood, he served in the Navy, and by his late 20s, he moved out to San Francisco to sell medical equipment. But look, this wasn't some glamorous sales job. He was lugging these heavy, insanely expensive bone density scanners door to door at hospitals, basically begging doctors to buy them. The pay was totally inconsistent. Some months he literally sold nothing. And that crushing financial pressure, it was completely destroying his relationship with his son's mother. They were fighting constantly, and it all traced back to money struggles.
But through all that early chaos, Chris held on to this one quiet promise. He told himself, when I grow up, my children will always know who their father is, and he will be present. Because he never knew his own dad, Chris made that promise to himself as a little boy. And as we're going to see, this single, simple promise would end up becoming the absolute most powerful driving force in his entire life.
Section 2, the turning point. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive contrast of that afternoon. Because, the hardest part for Chris at this point wasn't necessarily just being broke. It was this deeply frustrating feeling of running on a treadmill as fast as humanly possible, but going absolutely nowhere. He'd put on his one decent suit, load a heavy scanner into the car, exhaust himself all day, and just wonder if tomorrow would ever be any different. Right up until this one specific afternoon in the San Francisco financial district. Imagine the scene. On one side, you've got Chris, exhausted, lugging equipment, stressing about rent, wearing his one okay suit. And on the other side, a guy steps out of a bright red sports car. Expensive suit, confident walk, just radiating that I've got life figured out energy. The gap between their two worlds was a million miles wide. But Chris didn't just stand there and watch the guy walk away. He walked right up to him and asked two life-changing questions. What do you do, and how do you do it? The guy just smiled and said, I'm a stockbroker. Now, think about this. Chris had no business degree, zero connections on Wall Street. But seeing that confidence, that raw possibility, it lit a fire in him. He looked at that broker and just decided, right then and there, if that man can do it, why can't I?
But, well, ambition is one thing, right? Reality is a whole different beast. Section 3, the locked bathroom door.
So Chris decided to apply to a major financial firm's stockbroker training program. It was notoriously brutal to get into, but he was just relentless. He called, he showed up, and he actually managed to impress the hiring manager with his sheer grit. He got in. But then, he was immediately hit with a devastating reality. Zero. That is exactly how many dollars Chris was going to earn for the entire 6-month training program. For half a year, he'd have to work full-time, study for a rigorous licensing exam, and earn absolutely nothing. No safety net, no guaranteed income, nothing. And the math of this gamble was just terrifying. Out of 20 trainees in the program, there was exactly one permanent position available at the end. Just one. Chris took the risk anyway because he felt like it was his only real way out. But man, the gamble blew up fast. Within weeks, his girlfriend left and took what little they had, his landlord locked him out for missing rent, and suddenly, a guy training for a high-stakes job on Wall Street found himself completely homeless, on the streets with his toddler son.
Chris's daily routine became unimaginably grueling. I mean, he was completely homeless. Every morning, way before dawn, he'd wake up in a shelter or sometimes a park bench, get his son dressed, drop him at a low-cost daycare, and walk into that financial firm in his one wrinkled suit. He studied on public buses. He hammered out cold calls during lunch while everyone else was eating. He'd memorized stock terms while feeding his boy at a church shelter. And he hid all of it from his colleagues. To them, he was just a guy in a suit outworking everybody else.
And then we get to the moment that really defines his entire story: the locked door. One evening, with literally nowhere else to go, Chris took his little boy into a subway station bathroom. He locked the door, spread a thin blanket out on the cold tile floor, and just held his boy close. And as someone started knocking aggressively on the outside of the door, Chris pressed his foot against it to hold it shut. He sat there, crying silently in the dark, tears streaming down his face, just making sure he wouldn't wake his sleeping child. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that this wasn't some gentle, hopeful movie moment. Chris made a desperate, furious decision on that tile floor. I will never be in this situation again. I don't care what it takes. That locked door became his ultimate symbol. He realized that if he could hold that door shut against the whole world to protect his son while having absolutely nothing, he was stronger than his circumstances. Every single obstacle he faced after that night was really just another door to hold.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, Building an Empire.
Chris figured out pretty quickly that because 20 people were fighting for one spot, being good just wasn't going to cut it. He had to be undeniably the best. He made more cold calls than anyone. He arrived first. He left last. He treated every single day in that office like a job interview, because for him, it was literally life or death. And you know what? That relentless work ethic paid off. Chris passed the brutal licensing exam on his very first try. He beat those incredible odds and secured that one single full-time position. The hiring manager actually told him he'd never seen anyone work with that kind of intensity. When Chris finally got his first real paycheck, he rented a basic, simple one-bedroom apartment. He sat on the floor and cried, not because it was fancy, but because that night, his son finally had a real bed to sleep in. But he didn't stop there. He became a top-performing broker. And then, in 1987, with just $10,000 to his name, no Ivy League degree, no family wealth, he took another massive risk. He founded his very own brokerage firm in Chicago called Gardner Rich. People doubted him again, of course, but to Chris, starting a business was a walk in the park compared to sleeping on a subway bathroom floor.
His firm thrived, managing millions of dollars. Chris Gardner went from a homeless trainee to a Wall Street multimillionaire. He got the best-selling memoir, the major Hollywood film, the whole shebang. But look at what he considers his real success. When people ask him about his greatest achievement, he never mentions the millions. He says, "My son grew up knowing his father. That was the promise I made as a child, and I kept it." Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, 3 Lessons for Success.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that Chris's story isn't just some cool Wall Street anecdote. It's a literal masterclass in the principles required to refuse your current situation as your final destination. Let's break down what we can actually take away from his journey. The Chris Gardner mindset sounds a little harsh at first. The world owes you nothing. No one is coming to save you, not the government, not your family, not a lucky break. You have to earn every single thing. But Chris found this idea incredibly liberating. Why? Because once you realize you have to build your own ladder, you finally stop waiting around for a rescue that's never going to come. You take your power back.
Here are 3 actionable lessons from his life. Number 1, stop waiting for perfect conditions. They do not exist. Chris started his high finance career while hiding his homelessness. Imperfect action will always beat perfect planning. Number 2, protect your vision from doubters. People who haven't achieved anything are always going to tell you it's impossible. Their limitations are not your truth. And number 3, make a promise and keep it. Find a why that is way bigger than your comfort zone, just like Chris did for his son, and let that promise pull you forward through the hardest days.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this absolutely powerful quote from Chris. "The cavalry isn't coming. You have to do this yourself." The responsibility of changing your life rests entirely 100% on your shoulders. But the beautiful flip side of that hard truth is that Chris's story is living proof that you absolutely can do it. Think about it. You're watching this explainer right now, which means you have a device, an internet connection, and the ability to learn practically anything in the world for free. You have infinitely more resources at your fingertips right now than Chris Gardner had on his absolute worst night in that subway bathroom. So the only question left is, what are you going to do with your resources? Tomorrow can only be different if you decide, right here, tonight, that it will be.